All right, welcome. If you've got an exam coming up on aquaculture, you are in exactly the right place. This explainer is going to be your complete review for acing any questions on the world's most farmed shrimp, Litopenaeus vannamei. Okay, so here's our game plan to get you ready. First, we'll get properly introduced to this little creature. Then, we're going to trace its incredible life journey, all the way from the deep ocean to the coast. After that, we'll look at how we as farmers manage that cycle, from old school ponds to super high-tech tanks. We'll take a peek inside a hatchery, then we're going to tackle a really tough topic, Eyestalk Ablation. And finally, we'll boil it all down to the absolute key points you need to know. So, first things first, let's meet the absolute superstar of global aquaculture, the white-legged shrimp. Now, its native home is in the warm, tropical waters along the eastern Pacific coast. Think Mexico all the way down to Peru. But today, it's become the most important and widely farmed shrimp species on the entire planet. And its popularity? Well, it really comes down to this number right here. A single female can pop out up to 250,000 eggs. Just let that sink in. From a commercial standpoint, if you can figure out how to reliably trigger that reproductive explosion in a controlled setting, you've just hit the jackpot. And that's exactly what the industry did. It completely changed the game. So we know they can produce a ton of eggs, but how does that whole process unfold out in the wild? This brings us to the first huge part of your exam question, outlining the life cycle. And trust me, it's a really fascinating journey that takes them from the deep open ocean to the shallow, rich waters of the coast. This timeline really maps out the shrimp's entire odyssey. It all starts with a mature adult out in the deep blue sea. But its babies, they go through this incredible transformation. They start out as these tiny planktonic drifters, shape-shifting through these weird and wonderful stages, the nauplii, the zoea, and the mysis, before they finally start to look like a tiny shrimp and make that all-important trip to coastal mangroves to grow up. Okay, so the whole cycle kicks off when the adults, about 6 or 7 months old, head for deeper, more stable ocean waters. The female goes through a pre-mating molt, and then the male transfers this little package of sperm. It's called a spermatophore. Now, the female, she's smart. She holds on to this until the conditions are just right. Then, when she's ready to spawn, she releases her eggs and they get fertilized on the way out. So once those eggs hatch, the larvae go through this dramatic metamorphosis. They start out as nauplii, which don't even eat, they just live off their own yolk sac. Then, boom, they transform into zoea, and they start filter feeding on microscopic plants. Next up, they become mysis, and now they're actively hunting tiny animals. And after all that, they finally molt into what we call post-larvae. At this point, they look like miniature adults, and they switch to a bottom-dwelling, eat-anything lifestyle. So that's the natural playbook. The big question for us is, how have we harnessed this incredible life cycle for mass production? This brings us to the different culturing systems. For your exam, you absolutely need to know the difference between extensive, semi-intensive, and intensive systems. Now this table is your cheat sheet. It lays out all the core trade-offs. Just look at the pattern. As you move from left to right, from extensive to intensive, everything, and I mean everything, scales up. The cost goes up, the risk goes way up, the number of shrimp you stock goes up, and hopefully your profit goes up too. It's a spectrum, from low input, low output, all the way to high stakes, high reward. Okay, so extensive systems are the most traditional, the most old school. We're talking huge ponds, often built by clearing out vital mangrove forests. They basically just rely on the natural tides to bring in water and, hopefully, some wild shrimp larvae. There's no extra feed, very little management, which means your costs are low, but your yields are also low and super unpredictable. And that environmental cost, it's a big one. Semi-intensive systems are the middle ground, kind of the just right approach for many farmers. They use smaller ponds, they stock them with post-larvae from a hatchery, and they give nature a little boost with fertilizers and some extra food. They also add aeration at night to make sure the oxygen levels don't crash. This approach gives you much higher, more reliable yields, making it a very popular and profitable way to farm shrimp. And then you have the other extreme, intensive systems. These are basically high-tech shrimp factories. We're talking small tanks packed with shrimp at unbelievable densities. Here, the shrimp depend completely on formulated feed, and you need constant, heavy aeration just to keep them alive. The potential yields are massive, but that crowded, stressful environment is an absolute tinderbox for disease. One mistake, and you can lose everything. And when you look at it visually, the difference in productivity is just striking. On a per-hectare basis, a typical intensive system can pull in around 15 tons. That's more than double a semi-intensive system and a whopping 15 times more than an extensive one. This right here, this is the economic incentive that's driving the whole industry towards intensification. So, here's the crucial point. If you want to run one of these advanced, semi-intensive, or intensive farms, you can't just wait for wild larvae to float in. No way. You need a consistent, reliable, high-quality supply of post-larvae. And that's where hatcheries come in. Their job is to close the life cycle inside a totally controlled environment. Inside that hatchery, it's all about precision. The operators are like super attentive babysitters for millions of tiny shrimp. They select the absolute best female broodstock and get them to spawn. They collect the fertilized eggs, move them to perfectly maintained hatching tanks, and as the larvae morph through each stage, they get a specific tailored diet. First diatoms, then rotifers and artemia, until finally, the tiny post-larvae are ready to be harvested and sent to the farms. Now for the second part of your exam question. There's a catch with these controlled hatchery environments. Sometimes it can be really difficult to get the female shrimp to mature and spawn when you want them to. This problem has led to a very common, but also very controversial practice called unilateral eyestalk ablation. Unilateral eyestalk ablation is, well, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It is the physical removal of one of the shrimp's two eye stalks. It's a blunt intervention designed to hijack the shrimp's natural hormonal system, basically forcing the female into reproductive mode. Okay, here's the science behind it. You can think of shrimp reproduction as a hormonal tug of war. In one corner, you have the eye stalk. It produces a hormone that acts like a stop signal. It's called gonad-inhibiting hormone, or GIH. In the other corner, you have the brain, which produces a go signal, called gonad-stimulating hormone, or GSH. By physically removing one eye stalk, you dramatically reduce the amount of the stop signal, which lets the go signal take over and kickstart maturation. And the way they perform this ablation? Well, there are several techniques. They range from pretty crude manual methods like pinching or cutting with a razor blade to tying off the eye stalk, which is called ligation. A slightly more advanced method is cauterization, which uses heat to remove the tissue and seal the wound at the same time. So what are the concerns? Why is this so controversial? Well, for the mother shrimp, the consequences are pretty severe. The procedure itself causes acute pain and stress. It often leads to higher death rates, a general decline in their physical health because of the strain of forced reproduction, and of course, it leaves an open wound that's a huge risk for infection. And the damage doesn't just stop with the mother. There's a real biological cost that gets passed down to the next generation. Offspring from ablated females tend to be weaker. You see smaller spawn sizes, fewer eggs actually hatching, and the larvae that do survive often develop slower and have more deformities. This maternal stress effect basically reduces the quality and survival rate of the entire batch. All right, let's pull this all together. Here are the key takeaways, the absolute must-know points for your exam. We've gone through the biology, the production systems, and a major management controversy. Okay, 3 key things. First, you have to remember that the shrimp's complex, 2-part life cycle, deep sea to coast, is the biological blueprint that all farming systems are trying to manage. Second, the choice of farming system is always a trade-off. It's a balance between cost, environmental impact, risk, and how much shrimp you can produce. And third, eyestalk ablation. Remember that while it works to induce spawning, it comes with serious animal welfare issues and biological consequences for both the mothers and their offspring. And all of this brings us to the central challenge for the future of shrimp farming. The world wants more shrimp, there's no doubt about that. But can we innovate our way to a system that's both super productive and ethical? Can we get so good at managing nutrition and the environment that stressful interventions like ablation just become a relic of the past? The answer to that question is going to define the next chapter of aquaculture. Okay, that's our explainer. Good luck with your exam.